Hold on to your scrum caps, because we're going to go on a wild ride through some mental Rugby World Cup moments, from dodgy refereeing calls to extreme military-style boot camps. This is 5 of the most controversial moments at Rugby World Cups. Australia versus Scotland is the 2015 World Cup, and Scotland are just off the back of a close-fought game against Samoa to progress over miraculous Japan to the quarterfinals for the first time since 2007. Whereas Australia had beaten host England and Wales to finish top of their pool, Scotland were massive underdogs. In a weekend that saw the other 3 quarterfinals end with Southern Hemisphere victories, Scotland weren't just fighting for the pride of their nation, but for half of the world's. To many surprise, Scotland managed to stay in the game. Every time Australia looked to gain some momentum and push ahead, Scotland managed to pull them right back. And somehow, as the clock was entering the 79th minute, Scotland found themselves 2 points ahead. The Scots were starting to believe. But if you're a Scottish fan, you'll know we're experts at clutching defeat from the jaws of victory. And after an overthrown line-out, a knock-on would find its way into replacement prop John Welsh's hands, and the referee would award a penalty for offside. The only problem was, he wasn't offside. From the replays, you could clearly see that the ball came off an Australian player before John Welsh caught the ball, meaning that it shouldn't have been a penalty as the player was no longer offside, and it should have just been a scrum. Bernard Foley would step up to break Scottish hearts and kick the ball through the uprights to win the game for Australia 35-34. Australia would go on to comfortably beat Argentina in a semi-final before losing to New Zealand in the final. Now, the poor call for the penalty is one thing. It's rugby, that stuff happens. And at the time, the protocol said referee Craig Joubert couldn't go to the TMO to check it. But what was worse was after the game, the referee ran straight off the pitch and didn't talk to or shake hands with any of the players or captains. Scotland would gain their revenge over Australia in 2017 by beating them in Sydney, then booting 54 points past them at Murrayfield, a record win for Scotland over the Wallabies. But this is tame compared to what's to come. Camp Staldrod. Okay, so this one is f***ing insane. Camp Staldrod, which translates to Camp Barbed Wire in English, was a boot camp organised for team building for the Springboks for the 2003 Rugby World Cup. Some of the things that allegedly happened here were horrendous. After South Africa exited the Rugby World Cup, it was reported that players had allegedly been forced into freezing lake to pump up balls underwater, with it being further alleged that players who tried to leave the water were forced to back in at gunpoint. A few days after the first leak, the media reported other details from the supposed boot camp. The team had been forced into a foxhole naked and made to sing the national anthem while ice-cold water was being thrown over them. Firearms were confirmed to have been present on site, although whether they were ever pointed at anyone is unknown, as reports were varied. The players also had to spend a night in the desert, where they had to kill and cook chickens. They also weren't given knives to do this with. They had to kill them with their own bare hands. The players were also involved in bare-knuckle fighting between each other. This was very obviously seen as too extreme and had most South Africans condemn Camp Staldrod. It was said that this was done to try and eliminate individuality from the team, which to me seems fairly counterproductive, as in my opinion, you need individuals and characters to drive the team forward at certain points in rugby matches. Sadly, Dale McDermott, who was the team's video analyst and who leaked the film of the humiliating camp tactics, was ostracised in South Africa and committed suicide 2 years later in his Durban home. The 1995 poisoning. South Africa hosted the World Cup in 1995, which is also the first they partook in due to the end of the apartheid regime. New Zealand looked unstoppable at this World Cup, with the emergent talent of Jonah Lomu tearing teams apart from the wing. This resulted in setting the point scoring record in a single match, when they put 145 points past Japan in their third pool stage game. After sailing past Scotland and England in the knockout stages, they looked hot favourites to beat South Africa in the final. But we all know the story at this point of South Africa's miraculous win in the 95 Rugby World Cup and Nelson Mandela entering the field wearing a Springbok jersey. But what many don't know about is the accusations of poisoning before the match. New Zealand massively underperformed in the final. Having scored 41 tries in the lead up, they failed to score any against South Africa. This led to rumours of New Zealand being poisoned in South Africa, with stories of projectile vomiting, food poisoning and contaminated water persisting over the coming decades, along with a mysterious waitress called Susie. It's believed that up to 31 of their 36-man squad could have fallen ill within 48 hours of the final. The All Blacks head coach even hired a private investigator to look into the situation after the final. The investigator found that Susie was employed at the hotel only days before the New Zealand team arrived, and the day after the alleged poisoning, she had vanished never to be seen again. Ex-bodyguard of Nelson Mandela, Rory Stain, believes that betting syndicates could have been behind it. However, many within SA Rugby, including ex-CEO Ed Griffiths, insist the All Blacks just ate some bad seafood before the final and have no one to blame but themselves. Regardless as to what the truth is in this situation, it most definitely is one of the strangest moments in Rugby World Cup history. The France coach manhandles a referee. In the 1991 World Cup quarter-final, the two best teams in the Northern Hemisphere would come face to face in France and England. France had won 6 Five Nations titles in the previous 10 years, but England were off the back of a Grand Slam that year and hadn't lost their last 3 matches to Les Bleus. The games were always physical and dirty, and this one was no different, with England players smashing into the French after the mark was called, and players being stamped upon all over the pitch. England would be victors 19-10, and the runners-up in the 1987 World Cup would get knocked out at the quarterfinals. The French were not happy with Kiwi ref David Bishop, with Serge Blanco accusing him of turning a blind eye to English foul play, but it didn't stop at words. French coach Daniel De Broca hunted down Bishop after the final whistle and reportedly grabbed him by the throat and spit at him repeatedly while calling him a cheat in an out-of-control rage. The French prop Pascal Ondar was also alleged at trying to physically assault Bishop by trying to punch him. There was widespread horror at what had happened, and De Broca was forced to resign. The referee took it in good spirits, however, and quipped that he had been shaken warmly by the throat. Scotland sues a typhoon. Okay, now obviously that isn't what happened, but it's funnier when you put it that way. But to be honest, it isn't far off. Now earlier in the video we talked about how Scotland were unjustly knocked out of the 2015 World Cup. Well, in 2019 they got more than they deserved when they lost to Japan in their final pool match, which had them finish 3rd in Pool A. In the lead up to the final round of the 2019 World Cup pool stages, the hosts Japan were hit by a massive typhoon which cost the lives of 121 people. Rugby was an afterthought to everyone during this time. Well, almost everyone. Scotland CEO Mark Dodson threatened World Rugby with legal action as it was suggested the Scotland v Japan game could be cancelled, with the game being called a 0-0 draw. This would have seen Scotland get knocked out of the World Cup and Japan progress to the quarterfinals. The game would manage to go ahead at the scheduled venue, but Scotland would lose to the hosts and get knocked out of the World Cup anyway. This also saw Scotland tumble down the world rankings, which the 2023 Rugby World Cup was based on, and it was less than good for Scotland. Scotland find themselves in a group with 3-time World Cup winners South Africa and current world number 1s Ireland. So thanks Marky Mark, we're still paying for that, and if you want to find out everything you need to know about this World Cup, check out this video right here. Thanks for watching.